Hi, I'm Herschell Gordon Lewis. It's Friday night. You're watching Indie Horror TV. And don't go anywhere. We have a lot to tell you tonight.
Anyway, I'm James Saito with Diabolique Films. We're a division of Diabolique Horror Magazine. And, well, you're welcome back. This is the... Okay. No, I'm getting double feedback. Anyway, I'm James Saito with Diabolique Films. We're a division of Diabolique Horror Magazine. We are open to your questions right now, so please, if you're in the guest room, send us some questions. No, I'm getting double feedback. We are open to your questions right now, so please, if you're in the guest room, send us some questions. Herschell, do you have anything you'd like to say about BLOODMANIA while I'm trying to fix my problem here?
Yes, well, this is classic in the motion picture industry. You know something is going to go awry and don't know what it is. And that is absolutely a symbol of making movies, which one day whoever's watching this may get involved in because obviously you have an interest in this kind of picture. One point I would make relative to BLOODMANIA is that what we're doing in this movie is making a step in a direction that might bring into our orbit people who normally say, oh, I don't watch that kind of movie. They will not say that about this one because this movie has it all. It's got lots of gore, of course. That's our claim to fame in this industry, and nobody can touch us on that level. But it also has a sense of humor. And what that does in a motion picture of this type is lift it above the standard scream in which some girl is sitting in and watching TV and a hand comes through the window and grabs her. Not on this movie. This movie really rocks. And we have in this movie 4 separate episodes which are loosely tied together, but each one of which stands independently as a communicative device, and more important, not from our viewpoint, but from yours, an entertainment that you will not see anywhere else, any place, not on TV, not in theaters, not on DVD. You'll see it here, or you're going to say, hey, I missed the first movie that ever combined all these.
Okay, I think I got my problem fixed here, Herschell. We have a question. How did the two of us meet, and how did BLOODMANIA come together?
Am I supposed to answer that, or are you?
I'll give that one to you.
Okay. We met about a year and a half ago in Calgary at a little horror film festival in which I was very much impressed by the way it ran. And that was run by a fellow named James Saito.
No. I wasn't the runner of it.
You were the straw boss. How's that?
Well, I was involved.
No, I know you didn't own it. You were not the owner. I'll make that very clear. But you were the person I dealt with. And one thing you learn in this business is the people you deal with are the people whom you trust. And immediately I said, this fellow is of my caliber. That doesn't sound good, does it? If you're of my caliber, that means you're brain damaged. We began discussing making a movie. And what Jim Saito had in mind was something I hadn't done before. That was a series of 4 episodes, each of which would run somewhere between 20-25 minutes, loosely bound together by a narration and examples. And what grabbed my attention immediately was, first of all, that I would write one of the 4 segments, I would direct a couple of them, and I would act pretty much as the narrator in between the segments. And that did really appeal to me. I liked that notion because it suggested an independence of spirit, which you don't often get when a screenwriter or a producer falls in love with his own idea, begins to play Pygmalion, and any suggestion, somebody on the outside, even somebody who is in it in a leading role, or for that matter, is the director. Any suggestion is rejected because you're attacking my child. We don't take that point of view. And in fact, if you had been on the set as we were shooting this thing, you would see that any suggestion from anyone in cast or crew made sense. You never quite know where a good idea is coming from, and it's not always from your own brain. Jim, why don't you expand on that?
Well, the thing is that there couldn't be a Pygmalion sort of attitude, because this film has gone through so many producers, different writers at various stages, different actors and actresses, different concepts. Early on, we thought of doing it as almost an anthology like Amicus Films used to make out of England, where you'd have a wraparound story that introduced you to characters from all 4 and then had a conclusion. But what we decided instead was we would go with Herschell as the narrator. Almost, Rod Serling in Night Gallery or Twilight Zone style, and even appearing as the narrator in one of the episodes. And I think that works better for the possibility of sequels. It gives us a consistency and a format that we can use down the road. The same is going to be done with theme music. There'll be a Herschell Gordon Lewis theme that'll run through this and other subsequent movies that we make, anthology films. So that's basically that.
That's a point, by the way, that I'll expand on, because one of the most intriguing aspects from my point of view is Jim's idea of starting a permanent production company that will produce this kind of movie, maybe 1 or 2 of them each year, until we all get so tired or old we can't do it anymore. But I certainly do embrace that notion, because one of the gauges I personally employ in trying to figure out how it worked out, the question I ask is, did I have a good time? I grant you that's not a business-like question, but it's certainly a logical question at some point in the career of a goofball in the movie business. And the answer to that question is yes, I had a good time. And I will tell you also that Calgary is a surprisingly strong place to make a movie. Many locations, many talented actors, many talented technicians, and now a producer whom I respect.
Oh, well, thank you. And the way it's looking now, folks, is that we plan to shoot a short film every 3 months or so that at the end of a year, we'll have 4 more segments to go towards a Herschell anthology. And at the same time, Diabolique Films and my own production company, HGB Entertainment Limited, will be shooting a feature film per year. This is what we have planned anyway, a horror film. And I guess my life is pretty busy from here on in, Herschell. And something I never thought I'd be doing. I've often said I've stumbled into the show business world backwards through the back door. And 2 years ago, this was something I never pictured I'd be doing. So
well, we both were either victims or winners from serendipity, from finding what we are not looking for.
Yeah. Well,
That's the challenge of this business anyway. And if this movie performs the way we anticipate that it will, then we've started something else as well. A follow-up group who will seize our idea and try to do better than we did at that. That's perfectly normal in business. We are the pioneers. We are blazing the trail. And when you see this movie, wherever it's shown, because we're still evaluating distribution procedures, you will say to yourself, I never saw anything quite like that before. And if you have that reaction, then our goal has been achieved.
how did you guys get started in films, making films? Well, I think I just explained that. Herschell, yours is an interesting story. That's Keenan P. I just asked that a few seconds ago. How did you get involved in film?
Thank you for asking that question, because it shows an evolvement that no one could anticipate. I started my career as a school teacher. I taught English literature at a college, and I felt that would be my career forever, because my specialty was poetry of the Victorian era. Now, as some of you folks may know, Queen Victoria took the crown in 1837 and died in 1901, and that was the golden age of British poetry. And here we have Tennyson and Browning and A.E. Housman, and these people are not about to write another poem. So one set of lecture notes lasts a lifetime. And I was perfectly content in that particular situation for a while. And then I began to wonder, why am I spending my life grading papers written by people with bad penmanship and poor spelling, and who have no real interest in the subject I'm teaching? At that point, I had an offer to go into the advertising business at a number of dollars considerably greater than what was being paid to me as an associate professor of English literature. So I grabbed it and got in the advertising business. This is in Chicago. The fellow who hired me told me he needed a television director because he was about to pick up a major advertising account. And they insisted that he have someone with that kind of background. And I had amassed a little bit of that. As it turned out, he didn't get that account. But during the period in which we were negotiating, we were shooting some commercials. And I directed those commercials because I was the TV director at that agency. All right, the next station of the cross. We were shooting in a little studio on Wabash Avenue in Chicago, and the company only had 16 millimeter movie equipment. The big advertising agencies would go to California to shoot their commercials because the California film producers had 35 millimeter equipment. Well, nothing would do but we pick up 35 millimeter equipment, which I did. And I had an ancient Volkswagen bus crammed with obsolete equipment, which cost me just about every dime I had. And the big agencies still went to California to shoot their commercials. At that point, somebody I barely knew really influenced my life forever. And on the tennis court, he said, how do you make any money in the movie business? I was complaining about it quite rationally, saying, why did I ever quit teaching Robert Browning, who in one of his poems said, the best is yet to be. So, all right, where's the best? He says, how do you make any money in that business? I said, the only way to make money is to shoot features. He said, well, why don't you shoot features? A question that is just about as broad as, why aren't you rich? As though you have a lot of control. But that planted the nasty seed. And at that very moment, I began to wonder, why don't I shoot a feature? So I began to explore that avenue since I now owned 35 millimeter movie equipment. And I began to grind out like so much hamburger, cheap, low budget movies, which astoundingly didn't seem to lose a lot of money. But then, of course, the natural evolution is, how do you make more? How do you establish a position other than that of follower? One night I was watching late television. Here was a gangster movie in black and white with Edward G. Robinson or somebody, and the police pumped a lot of bullets into him, and he died peacefully with a little splotch on his shirt. And I said, wait a minute, that's not the way it goes. By the time I woke up the next day, I had the idea of expanding on that and making a much more realistic image of that kind of activity. Jim, am I going too far on this, or
No,
what? Keep going? Okay.
It's fascinating.
All right. So at that time, I was shooting a commercial down in Miami, in Florida. I was still living in Chicago, but the weather was turning bad, and down we went to Florida to shoot. And at that moment, the inspiration hit, because I was staying at a schlocky little hotel on the ocean front called the Suez Motel. And the Suez had an Egyptian theme, and in fact, outside the Suez was a sphinx. Now, if you've been to Giza in Egypt, as I have, you know there's a sphinx there. It's about 200 feet high, rather impressive, even though the Mamelukes cut the nose off it way, way back. Outside the Suez Motel was a sphinx about 8 feet high. But so what? Against the sun, a sphinx is a sphinx. And that gave me the notion for an Egyptian overtone to this movie. And we literally made this story up as we shot. On occasion, someone will say to me, who wrote the script for Blood Feast? And my answer always has been, what's that? Because there really wasn't one. We shot what we could shoot. To my total surprise, because we bought as little film as we could. We're shooting in 35 millimeter color on the bottom end of budget. We had, one, no cast of any name value. Number two, no crew. I was the director and cameraman. My partner at the time, Dave Friedman, was the producer and sound man, and we were the crew. In fact, on some of the sync take, sync is SYNC, standing for synchronous. The actors would have to work their own clapstick, throw it aside, and start acting. We had nobody else. We'd pick up the cables at the end of the day. If you have a lot of ego, this is not a thing you want to get involved in. So we finished Blood Feast, and it became clear to me as we did that what's important here is the campaign. What can you say and do that is not typical of what everybody else says and does? And if you look at the campaigns for some of today's horror films, you say, I've seen that before. You won't say that about any of my films, and certainly you won't say that about BLOODMANIA, because you have not seen anything like this before. But this is way down the line. We opened Blood Feast in a little theater in Chicago, and to my total astonishment, we crocked them. No, actually, we opened it in a drive-in theater in Peoria, figuring if we die in Peoria, who will know? But no, we didn't die, and the entire industry knew then, as it knows now. A couple of days after you open a movie, they know whether you've made money or lost money. All right, well, I'll jump ahead in time, because over the years, my image, such as it is, in the world of horror films is certainly well enough established that I don't want to go over it again. But what I will say is this.
There is a question, Herschell. It says, when the Wizard of Gore and the Gore Girls came out, there wasn't really anything like them. Do you feel a sense of accomplishment for what you've seen happen to the horror genre since?
See, that's two separate questions, because the answer is yes and no. It's like the old joke they tell about a fellow who had a date with a pair of Siamese twins. And his friend said, "Did you have a good time?" He said, "Well, yes and no." in, this, in this situation, I was thrilled to have been regarded as the person who established this kind of movie until we made Blood Feast, and then 2000 Maniacs, and then The Wizard of Gore, and then, as this question just brought up, the Gore Girls. Nobody had made a movie like this. There had been horror films, but not where blood gushed the way we had it gushing. So we really did change the industry, at least on what was then a low level. You see, what I'm proving is if you live long enough, you become legitimate.
We have another question.
Since then, my feeling is that too many of today's movies are what I call derivative. You feel you're seeing the same movie over and over again. And one of the developments that I will not take credit for, but simply look at as though I'm looking in a one-way mirror, is that now 35 millimeter, in my opinion, is becoming obsolete to a point at which, let's say 5 years from now, it's museum material. Everything now that we have of value in movie making, in terms of the dollars in versus dollars out, is digital. And without getting too technical, digital has advantages you would never, ever find on film, including picture quality. That's become more significant than just saving a few dollars if you make a mistake as you're shooting something. So I take no credit whatever for what's happened since, let's say, period between the Gore Girls and the new stuff that I'm grinding out. That answer to your question in 10,000 words or more is yes and no.
Okay, well, we have a Scream Queen in the house. Genevieve Rossi has joined the chat room, and she asks both you and I how we think the two of us with Diabolique Film will revolutionize the horror genre. What will be Diabolique's legacy?
Well, you're in a better position to answer that than I am, Jim. My feeling is the legacy will be one of staying abreast of sociological as well as motion picture procedures, so that we reflect, I won't say organized society, there is no such thing, but we reflect trends, we reflect images, we reflect the kinds of news that one sees today without fear of becoming obsolete before we even do it. Jim, what's your opinion?
Well, that's true, because I know in BLOODMANIA there are certain, well, we play with the satire with today's social media and that sort of thing. As far as things like legacies go and that sort of thing, I mean, with BLOODMANIA, what I set out to do was make a Herschell Gordon Lewis style film, employing modern technology with practical effects.
So that's the point.
Yeah,
that's the point.
Little CGI as possible, and there will be some. I mean, there's.
But see, that's an edge we have. Now, if you folks don't know what CGI means, it means computer-generated images. And you will see 10,000 soldiers in the Roman Colosseum doing something or other. Our effects are practical effects. If somebody has a neck sliced, or the heart ripped out of the chest, or an arm severed, apparently on screen that's what happens. It's not done with computers. It's done with the most clever kinds of practical effects people we can find. And in BLOODMANIA, we found one. I wish I'd had someone like him when we made Blood Feast.
Yeah, Herschell's referring to Dave Traynor, who.
Dave Traynor, yes.
Yeah, horror fans may know his work from Blade 2. He works on Hell on Wheels here, that's shot in Calgary, as well as Fargo. If Fargo fans are out there, you remember Billy Bob Thornton pulling his fractured leg together last season. That was Dave's work. He also worked on Tucker and Dale versus Evil. He did the effects on that. So he's a very good effects man. It's a little bit hair-raising working with the practical effects because for some of the shots that we did, you've got one take. And it had better come off. And I think the filmmaking gods were smiling on us because every single time it worked. And I don't know if that's, just sheer luck on our part, but we got some very, very good gore effects that we're all very proud of.
Some credit, Jim. First of all, my personal philosophy, which I know Jim also embraces, don't shoot a rehearsal. You can ruin a costume by doing that, and you don't have a backup costume, so what do you do from there? You have to make a major change in something or other, or say, oh, well, we'll just do what we go with what we had. That's one benefit, I guess, of having some background in this business. But what else we have is fearlessness. And that's another reason I am very, very pleased to be associated with what's going on here in Calgary. It's the kind of thing that I had always hoped to be part of, where it's not just, okay, we made this thing, let's go on and see what we can do next. This seems to have some coherence to it, and I would be very, very pleased to be a part of a permanent production company.
Well, I've signed on now for 5 years with Diabolique Films. So that basically encompasses 5 features and probably 5 Herschell Gordon Lewis anthology films. What would the legacy be that I would like to leave after that time? I want to have entertaining films. It's one thing to have gore for gore's sake, but the whole point of storytelling is to tell a good story. And if you can sit down and throw in a Blu-ray or stream a film and laugh, have to cover your eyes, and just have an enjoyable 110 minutes of fun watching a horror film, then that would be satisfying to me when I retire from this industry sometime in the year 2019, which I will. I'm not going to be a hanger-oner.
One thing I can promise you, Jim, retirement plans can easily be changed. That's another benefit of being in the motion picture business. But the other point is, if I were to make Blood Feast today, it would be laughable, because that kind of thing, in my opinion, is okay for pioneering. It doesn't last for any great period of time. If people still had no superhighways and had only the horse and buggy, no automobiles, the entire world of commerce would still be grinding at that low pace it had back in the 1800s. We are lifting, even though our budgets don't indicate it, we're lifting this kind of movie above the norm. And that pleases me a great deal, where we can say, when maybe 20 years from now, when other people are making the kind of movies then that we are making right now, we can say, yep, okay, no surprise, we started it, and look where we are now, and they're still slobbering away with the techniques that we used 20 years ago.
Okay, question. What actresses can we expect to see in BLOODMANIA? I guess I'll take that one. I'm going to have to be delicate with this. The actors and actresses that I hired are all from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Because I'm a native Calgarian, I want to promote the film industry here. Calgary has a major studio opening, film studio opening in 2015. We just broke ground on it. It's an expanding industry. We hope that within 10 years' time we'll be as big as Toronto and Vancouver are in the Canadian film industry. Those of you who've seen Interstellar, all of the Earthbound shots are shot in Calgary. It's a place that's full of talent. So I went to our best local actors, and I think I managed to get every single one of them under contract. Exceptional performances. There's 2 or 3 performances here that will rival, well, basically anything in the horror field. Why did I do this? There was some question at the beginning of this project whether or not we should go with horror icon actors, that sort of thing. And at one point, yeah, that was definitely on our to-do list. I have a ratio as part of budgetary concern. If I take actor X, who is widely known in the horror industry, and I have to pay him $10,000 for a 5-day shoot, I now have to break that down. At $5 a download, you're looking at 2,000 downloads that I will have to get to pay for his salary.
Yep.
If I can find an actor locally who will do it for a fraction of that cost and give an equal or better performance, isn't that in the best interest of the film and the back end of the film, which is primarily what my job is as the producer? So there are names in this film that you may not know now. We've got Roger LeBlanc, who is a great actor, a horror fan who is a major Herschell Gordon Lewis fan. He's our lead actor. He's billed first. He adapted the Night of the Living Dead for the stage here in Calgary. Just a major horror fan and a great actor. He can be seen on Hell on Wheels on a regular basis. He played Calamity Joe, the drug dealer, on Fargo last year. If you've seen those, you're familiar with Roger. A young actress named Sonia Delio, who amazed me on set on a daily basis. So they're not going to be names you recognize, but there's also, Mr. Lewis is my mentor. And one thing that I learned from his experience is we're dealing with a horror movie. You don't need names. As long as the acting is there, you don't need a name.
Attention is not to the actor. Attention is to the action. And you come out of a theater, or someone is meeting somebody else casually in a store that sells DVDs. What is the conversation? Is it about the actor, or is it about what they've seen on the screen? And it's become quite clear to me over a lot of years and a lot of scar tissue in this business that the effects, that the overall impression dwarfs whoever might be in the movie. Now, let's suppose we just made BLOODMANIA and we had in it Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Would any of these people have improved anything we could offer you? In fact, could it have been possible for us to make that offer to you without pricing this thing so high you wouldn't get it in the first place? And the answer to that is quite obvious if you've ever been in the movie business, because that is not how people gauge a movie. And time after time, you will find a previously unknown movie that really knocks them dead at the box office. Why? Because they have a star name? No, because the movie is entertaining. Now here we have, and I'm going to tell stories out of school for a moment. The most powerful company in the business is Disney, perhaps for good reason. Disney recently took a $200 write down, $200 million write down on a movie called the Lone Ranger. Who is in the Lone Ranger? Johnny Depp. Is there any name that is either better known or better regarded, I guess is the word, than Johnny Depp? Not that I know of. Did Johnny Depp's name all over this thing make any difference in the movie sustaining a big loss? No, it did not. Why? Because the movie was apparently not entertaining. Here we had a movie based on an old Edgar Rice Burroughs story, John Carter of Mars. Now, Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote in the early 20th century, but the science fiction fans know the name. But whoever put this movie together titled it plainly John Carter. Would you go to see a movie named John Carter without the background of knowing what the whole thing was? Obviously not. And the movie did not make money. In our circumstance, we look at it from one viewpoint only. If I were going to see this movie, instead of making it, would I feel I got my money's worth? And that's the gauge that both Jim and I are perfectly willing to stand by when you go to see BLOODMANIA.
Okay, we have a
question on that point.
Let me see. Where's the question here? Herschell, aside from your own films, what is your favorite horror movie, past, present, and why?
Tough question because tastes change. For years, my favorite movie of all time was the first King Solomon's Mines with Stuart Granger. And then slowly that sort of faded, and I began to have a great reverence for a movie called The Wicker Man, which starred an actor named Edward Woodward. I don't know if he was an Australian, was he? What was he, Jim? Do you know? Anyway, Edward Woodward was in The Wicker Man. And I felt that was an extraordinarily well-made movie in which the whole impending horror built at a rate that made great sense dramatically. And then I made a mistake. They remade that movie and I went to see it. And I said, that's not the movie. And at that point I went to look at the original movie and I said, that's not it either. The movie did not have what we call in the movie business legs. So if you ask what is my favorite movie, you've got to ask me as of right now. Until we finish BLOODMANIA, my favorite movie is one that I made called 2000 Maniacs. Once we finish BLOODMANIA, I can promise you that will be my favorite movie, and regardless of who made it. It's an accident that Jim and I made that movie.
Okay, another question here. That question was from Mr. Skeeter Buster. Thank you for answering it, Herschel. For me, I know I asked last time, but you happen to have one of the most comprehensive zombie movie film sites, review sites on the planet. I find this fascinating. Tell us how you got started with that and how many films you've reviewed. Well, yeah, I get asked that a lot. Back in the 80s, mid-80s or so. I've always been from the time I was quite young, there were a few movies that made an impact and made me the horror fan that I am today. One was The Wizard of Gore, when I saw it at a drive-in theater. There was, well, Dawn of the Dead, the original Romero, and that kind of got me onto zombie films. I'd never seen, besides Herschel's films, violence that was done so well, gore that was done so well. So my friend Steve and I made it our mission, sort of, to go out and find as many zombie films as we could, the Italian films, and back in the mid-'80s, there weren't that many. They weren't produced 5 a day like you see them now. So essentially what we did was I'd start typing, and we'd write our own little reviews for reference. And someday I had hoped that I'd compile it into a book. And, well, when the internet came along, we kind of rededicated ourselves to sharing these reviews because, well, honestly speaking, you know, I've wasted a lot of my life on some of these films. There's a lot of bad zombie movies out there. Unfortunately, I've made it my mission to accomplish reviewing every single one of them. And lately I've been very amiss in my reviews because obviously I'm concerned with other aspects of filmmaking. But I've seen probably 450 zombie films, still have to write the reviews for about 150, have to refresh my mind about them. These days there's so many of them that it's almost painful. I need long breaks before I can even sit down because it's repetitive. Well, there's how many stories can you tell, really? I mean, I look at the zombie apocalypse like World War II. Everybody knows what happened in World War II. It's the personal stories that are interesting. What happened to individuals during that conflict. So it's the rare zombie movie that ever gets anything original while maintaining its violence and being entertaining, that catches my attention. So yeah, if I was to go at it with any kind of pace, again, I'd begin to hate the genre that I love, and so I do it sparingly now. We have a question. Herschell, has there ever been a project that you were attached to at one point where it ended up not working out that you regretted not being able to do later?
Tough question, because I dismissed those from my mind immediately. I've had situations in which I was called in after all the decisions were made, and I felt that there was no point for me being present in that kind of thing. Now, I made a movie once called An Eye for an Eye, in which I was, again, hired from the outside as director, the way you would hire somebody to wash your car. That's perfectly fine, because I enjoy being in the movie business. But what happened with An Eye for an Eye was the people who were making it simply ran out of money after we'd shot for about 3 or 4 days, and that was all. And I don't know what happened to the footage there, but it made me feel as though I were somehow personally involved in a loss, which I don't like to see. In terms of my own product, and I'm using the word advisedly, because movies are not a product. You don't grind these things out like cars, where they all are supposed to be of a certain look and length and number of pounds per square inch in the tires or whatever. I'm trying to think of one in which the disappointment factor was heavy, and I can't. And the reason I can't is because if these follow what I philosophically regard as good entertainment, how dare I withdraw later and say, hey, that wasn't what I had in mind. If I did it, I can't say it wasn't what I had in mind. You can't be that schizophrenic in this business. So I have no answer for you other than, yes, there have been products in which I simply didn't get involved to the extent where I would regret it later.
Okay, well, we're waiting for another question. First of all, it's Friday night and you're watching Indie Horror TV with Herschell Gordon Lewis and, well, me. I'm just a guy who produces films for Diabolique Films. I'm going to bring this to your attention. I don't know if you can see this very well, but if you would like a Herschell Gordon Lewis BLOODMANIA autographed poster, they are available at www.bloodmania.ca, not .com, .ca. And
you'll notice My signature is on that, by the way.
Yes, and
I don't
there's
do that
500
very
available.
lightly.
500 available, and they're numbered. So
Yeah, and these are truly limited editions. I have one framed on my wall. And if you knew my wife, to have a picture of that sort framed on my wall, that's got to be the ultimate compliment to a movie poster.
And the illustration is by Steve McGuinness, the horror illustrator who does cover art a lot of times for Diabolique magazine out of Ontario, Canada. Hi, Steve, if you're watching. The other thing I'd like to say is that Diabolique magazine is proud to announce that we're going to be opening yet another division to go along with Diabolique Films, Diabolique Store, Diabolique Film Festival. We are going to open Diabolique Publishing. The first book that we are going to put out is called Gory Days, The Life and Times of Herschell Gordon Lewis, written by Max Weinstein, who's the editor of Diabolique magazine. So come to the website, bloodmania.ca. Often we'll have autographed copies of the book signed by Mr. Lewis available there. As soon as the book is published, it's supposed to coincide with the release of BLOODMANIA. So that's just a little bit of news for indie horror TV fans. We haven't broken that news anywhere else. See if we've got some questions. Let's see. What was the most difficult film to work on and why? Budgetary, filming conditions, etc. that you shot?
I'll give you two answers to the same question. The most difficult picture to shoot was not necessarily the one that gave me the greatest number of problems. The one that gave me the most problems, as it turned out, was one I really do love called The Wizard of Gore. And one reason for that being, we had in that situation an executive producer. If you don't know the movie business, you're lucky, because classically, an executive producer is best described as a schmuck with a checkbook. The executive producer on The Wizard of Gore began to talk to my actor who was playing the role of Montag the Magician, which is the key role in The Wizard of Gore. One aspect of negotiating with actors is you recognize an actor must act. It's as though we have to eat, an actor has to act. So the benefit of that to the producer and to the director is you can get a very good talent without spending a lot of money. So we were off there to shoot this movie, The Wizard of Gore. And we didn't shoot in studios. We shot in apartments, we shot on the street, we shot inside buses, because studios were too expensive for that kind of movie. That's one of the challenges. The challenges you face, and you either conquer that challenge or you give into it. So my executive producer got into an argument with Montag the Magician, who said, well, for what you guys are paying me, screw this. And he walked off the set. And he stood outside the building waiting for somebody to come and coax him to come back in. I couldn't do that, because even though he was dead wrong, this executive producer was my de facto partner. So he stood outside the building, and he stood outside the building, and my partner would not do anything about it. And finally, in exasperation, because everybody was standing around waiting to see what would happen next, I had there one of my, I call them stock company people, a fellow named Ray Sager. And Ray would alternately on a movie either be in the cast or be on the crew. And it didn't bother him or me one way or the other, because heavy egos don't work in this kind of movie. And I said, all right, Ray, you want to be Montag the Magician? He said, sure. He put the costume on, and he became Montag the Magician. But then we had to match up what had been shot before. So that was a problem. But in another movie, I had a fellow on the crew named Ray Craig, and Ray's car was a school bus. That always impressed me because he had not removed the insignia off the side of this bus. So people thought it was a school bus with just one person in it. But that was his car. How he picked it up, I don't know. But Ray was a self-appointed expert in making movies. And here we were shooting, I think it was the Gore Girls, which I would guess had to be the most difficult of any movie I've ever made. We may have overextended ourselves in terms of our capability of what to do. So Ray said to me on the very first day of shooting, he said, on your camera, and I had a camera, people would say, that camera ought to be in the Smithsonian. My answer was, where do you think I got it? But it was a great big old Mitchell camera, and the one aspect of a Mitchell camera that no other camera, even including the Panasonic, which now uses a Mitchell movement. The difference was and is that in most cameras, such as an Arriflex, for example, the film is pulled down, held for a moment, and in 1/50th of a second, the image is registered and the next frame comes down. With a Mitchell, it comes down and 4 separate pins hold that film in place so it can't wobble as you sometimes do see. And Ray Craig said, you know, there's something wrong with a gate in your camera. I better clean that. I thought nothing of it. I said, all right, between takes, go ahead. So Ray Craig cleaned the gate of that camera. And we kept shooting. And we off went the film to the laboratory in New York. Because bear in mind, we're talking about 35 millimeter color film. You can't just send that down to the drugstore to get processed. About 11 o'clock the next morning, somehow they tracked me down from that laboratory. And I said, yeah, what's going on? The guy said, stop. I said, why am I stopping? He says, because you are shooting the pull down. What Ray Craig had done in rebuilding the gate of that camera was to cause us, instead of having the film held for a 50th of a second and then down to the next frame, it was shooting the 50th of a second as the film went through all 100% smear. Here I am with an absolute budget. What am I to do? Because we don't have that long a shooting schedule. I had to condense everything. And I put it to cast and crew on that level. Ladies and gentlemen, which a lot of people in our business are not, here is the situation, the dilemma on whose horns we are impaled. We have to really get shooting a lot faster than we did, and it may mean shooting deep into the night and starting again early the next morning, and we may settle for a take that you personally would not settle for. One absolute is that this movie gets finished before we run out of money, which is something a lot of people don't do. In fact, in a couple of cases, back in the days when the drive-in theaters were kings of distribution, and you had to have 2 movies, I would buy one from a laboratory, and the laboratories, every one of them that handled this kind of movie, especially independent movies, would have films that had somebody's heart and soul in them. But these people were not able to finish them, and the lab would take it on what they call a laboratory lien, L-I-E-N, and then offer it for sale to somebody else. And I'd pick up somebody's hopes and want that to happen to mine. But those are the movies that have problems. There's always a problem somewhere. And one reason, by the way, that I loved making BLOODMANIA, when something like that comes up, I've got Jim Saito here to worry about.
Yeah.
I'll go out and get a
My
glass
hair
of
is
chocolate milk.
grayer because of it. We have another question that asks, have there ever been any crazy stories like police involvement, accidents on the set, etc., from any of your films?
Oh, sure. Inevitably. You start shooting in traffic, or you shoot at night, and a cop will show up with gun in hand. That has happened, by the way. In fact, I've forgotten the movie we made. I think it was a chase, in which there's a chase scene at night. And we actually hired some off-duty police. I didn't want to pay for police uniforms. And there was a chase through an empty lot. And the policeman fired his gun with blanks, of course. In fact, it's always puzzled me in some of these countries where there's an uprising and they'll shoot guns into the air. Don't they know a bullet's going to come down? And occasionally somebody will get hit with one, and it could be a very serious wound. Well, these were blanks. But what happened then, because of this, suddenly there's squad cars all over the place. They didn't know that it was just a movie being shot. You better alert as many people as you possibly can. In an early movie, Living Venus, scenes in Living Venus as the fellow who plays the magazine publisher to get at a statue of Venus in a store window. He smashes the store window and pulls out the statue. Well, we found a store that was about to be demolished. It was perfect for us. And we smashed the window, and he pulled this out, and suddenly there were some unpaid actors on the set, a bunch of police who were arresting us all for smashing the window of that store. But this happens frequently, that you have unexpected things. It'll rain. If it starts to rain and you're shooting an exterior, big deal. You make the entire scene one that shot in the rain. And if you're not geared to take advantage of things that go wrong, get out of this and go selling shoes or something. This is not the business for you.
No, those are some gems for all the independent filmmakers that are watching. Well, when we shot segment number 1 with Roger, and we were doing the hostage scene with Karen Jenkins and Roger in the van. And it was an exterior. We picked a location that looked perfect for the scene, but it was across the street from a crack house. And there was a lot of noise coming from the crack house. And so it was like, would you shut up? We're trying to film over here. And I don't know if you got all of this, Herschell, because I was trying to keep them away from you. But this little crackhead comes walking over, and what are you doing? I said, we're shooting a film. You're going to have to ask you to leave. And he says, well, do you have a permit? I'd like to see the permit. And I said, I have a better idea. Why don't you just fuck off? And so I'm going to call the police and everything. And he did. And every time the police drove by, I'd wave at them or they'd wave at me. And you probably weren't involved with that one too much. But
we agree on another point too. Oftentimes, you can make a friend out of what otherwise would be an aggressor. I think on at least 3 separate incidents, we would hire someone who came to try to stop us from shooting. And in one of those cases, it was a policeman. And we put him in the show. So there are ways of covering that. If you find that you can't cover it, the answer is to get out of there as fast as you can, go somewhere else. But typically also, if you have a still photographer who is part of your crew, you better have one, by the way, because by the time somebody buys a DVD, the publicity is what causes that to happen. And if you don't have controlled publicity, nobody's going to buy your DVD. You can't just make a movie and say, gee, I'm a genius. So when you run into situations like that, and you have a photographer, that person is pure gold. He will say, just a moment, gentlemen, ladies, would you be, and suddenly the aggression just bleeds right out of them like good old stage blood.
Yeah, well, there was so many times when somebody would come and say, what are you doing? And we're filming a movie, and hey, actually, your place there looks pretty good. Do you mind if we stand in front of it? No, not at all. And the guy would be in the scene, and people are very cooperative, more so than they're a nuisance, I would say. But you run into that problem too. Hey, you know, would you stop hammering there on your roof, you roofers, for about 5 minutes? You know, we'll pay you. You know, never offer to pay them, because then you have everybody in the neighborhood wanting money to shut up. But yeah, so is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion? I think we've got about 2 minutes, Herschel. And
Well, first of all, if you have watched this little episode from beginning to end, I welcome you to our world, and I sincerely thank you for being interested in what we do. This is why we make this kind of movie, not to satisfy our own idea of what makes great drama, but to have people who are looking for entertainment find it. And so I thank you sincerely for being with us this evening.
And I'd just like to say thank you to Robert Poole and Indie Horror TV for having us on again. And thank you to the viewers who wanted us back. It's a pleasure to be back here. And, you know, hopefully after BLOODMANIA hits the shelves and you've all seen it, we can come back and chat about it some more.
Triumphant. That's
triumphant. Yeah.
Thank
triumphant.
you, Bob. Yeah. And thank you, folks.